Assalamu alaikum, Prof.
Okay.
Did they join? Prof. Abdul Latif was saying that the Zoom ID I sent to him, then they are using the Zoom ID.
It's not helpful. It's not friendly. No, unfortunately. I think we should.
I think the problem is like
Google Meet is far much better.
because this one requires sign in. I think you have to sign in. That is the reason.
Okay, so we try to see whether our guests, speakers are there or not.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Please.
I think it's entering now. If I'm mistaken, Abdullah.
Yeah. Dr. Fatmir, can you contact them through WhatsApp?
Yeah, Abdul Latif, he joined, Prof. Abdul Latif, Prof. Abdul Latif just joined now.
Okay. So,
You see the Abdul Latif there? The
AF, yeah?
Prof. Abdul Latif. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, he's there. Okay, let us
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr.
How are you?
Nasabi and Fatmir, and Sabrina is here. So this is Sabrina's session. So it's great to see you.
Okay, because you are our speakers, so we want you to be on board.
Inshallah. I will log on with my mobile. This Sabrina will use it. So I will give Sabrina this one. Okay. Yeah. So I will use.
You are not using a laptop or a computer.
No, I am using my mobile. Sabrina is using laptop. And so okay, I'm using Sabrina is using laptop. Later I will come here. Okay.
Okay. Shall we start, Dr. Fatmir?
Yeah, Prof. Now you are the moderator today. You are the leader for today. So I just listening today, Prof.
Yeah, you are.
I'm busy.
You are the boss.
Yeah. Now it's almost 5:30.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الصادق الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
السلام عليكم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Welcome everybody on board.
Assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And a special welcome to our dear speakers, Dr. Sabrina and Dr. Abdul Latif, who are joining us from Rome in Italy. And for Dr. Sabrina, this is the second time we meet online. The last one was about 2 years ago with a number of people from the US, England, Canada, Malaysia, which was on Maqasid as framework for a human good. And of course, part of dealing with the human good is how to promote good relations between people. Because if human relations are not working properly and peacefully and amicably, then you cannot expect human good to be promoted in the best manner possible. So it is in that framework that we are having today our two guest speakers, both of whom joining us from Italy, from Tawassul Center, which is reaching out. Is that correct, Dr. Sabrina?
Exactly, yes, thank you.
So it's a Reaching Out institution or institute, and both of them are active in that institute in different ways and different forms to promote communication with others, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, with the different faith communities and different belief systems and worldviews from the standpoint of Islam. And as the respected audience all know, we have actually limited time. It's from now until 6:45 p.m. Malaysia time, which is around 1.5 hours, something like that. That's roughly, or to 1:45, something like that. Anyway, the time we have, inshallah, to use as efficiently as possible. And I should first start with a brief introduction of the first speaker, Dr. Sabrina, who chose to speak for 20 minutes. In the maximum margin you can go for should not exceed 25 minutes. Dr. Sabrina is a philosopher by training. She has studied both ancient philosophy and modern philosophy in very important and specific topics dealing with time in Wittgenstein, and dealing and also in ancient philosophy. So she is both at home with ancient philosophy and modern and contemporary philosophy. She has been very active in intellectual production, whether by authorship or by translation. And we have a long list of her publications exceeding 20 titles. She has translated Iqbal, she has translated Abdullah Yusuf Ali, she has translated portions from Ihya Ulumuddin of Ghazali, she has translated parts of Sahih Muslim. So she has variegated actually types of activities in terms of intellectual production, which means that she has enriched immensely, and she continues to enrich immensely the Italian intellectual scene. And she has been involved in interfaith dialogues, and that's the very gist or the very essence of the name institute she is running. And of course, the institute has been the major public publisher of the works I just referred to. And her topic is going to be, as you have noticed in the program, it's Italian Muslim, Europe and Islam, identity, othering, and cultural harmony. So it is that she is going to address in her submission. So the floor is hers, and we are all attentive ears to follow what you are going to tell us. And please go on.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Nessawi. It's just an honor for me to be here addressing you and all the other distinguished audience about this very important topic, which is actually related not only to the situation of the Muslim in Italy and of course in Europe, because we as Tavaso, we always think at the European level, starting from the situation in Italy, but it's also open to a possible scenario in the future. So these 25 minutes, I will try to give an idea about what are the concepts from the philosophical perspective, and then in the end, what can be the possible application in the life of intellectual life and social life of the Muslim about the topic as identity, other in cultural hegemony, which is also which actually should be clear before to build a common society, which this is what we should, I think, aim to. And then I will try to explain in now why it's a need that we should be the promoter of a common understanding among people and the builder of also of a common shareable social and cultural space. So I will start speaking about the notion of identity. The knowledge about other culture, actually, religious or society, generally is formed to response of a cultural or self-understanding. So its attempt to solidify its cultural, civilizational, moral, and religious identities by creating the other. In other words, even when the objective knowledge of other culture is possible and is auspicable, this knowledge of the other tends to be sometimes very subjective. The problem is that when projection and construction of the other are based on the articulation of a cultural or anxiety and the pressing need to define and preserve its multi-dimensional identity, play a very decisive role in the formation of the knowledge of other cultures. So self-identity, or we can say identity, is in an easier way, is built in relation to the other from the self. Other in relation, this dialogical relation actually can assume a twofold character. One, the self could build the symbolical image of the other in a relation of opposition, of respect to idealized image of the self. The self could build its identity or narrate its history independently from the other, even if it recognizes actually the existence of the other by establishing a dialogical relation. In the second case, the connection could be actually interpreted as free from conflict, being rooted mostly on equality and open to a possible collaboration. But the problem is, the main problem, and actually what is happening now in our contemporary time, but this is actually what happened in the past, is that the model is the one that I just illustrated in the first case. In the first case, actually, the relationship is necessarily conflictual, since it is unidirectional and lacks reciprocity. As a consequence of this dynamic emerges a relation devoid of balance and reciprocity, which is grounded in turn on an hegemonic identity discourse. In the hegemonic identity discourse, the other is not independent in the construction of his own identity and his historical development. Actually, the historical development and the self-identity of the other is closely connected on the way in which the self of the hegemonic culture sees it. Through the objectifying discourse of the hegemonic identity, the other loses the status of the independent subject and consequently is excluded from an autonomous historical development. In this way, The other could be described as an individual, a community, a nation, or a civilization without an independent history. In the discourse of the hegemonic identity of self, lacking equilibrium reciprocity, the self assumes the character of the absolute independence. So the hegemonic identity is absolutely independent, becoming the only driving force of world history, while the other assumes the character of dependence, and the only suitable and available role for him is the passive assimilation and annihilation of his individuality and historical, cultural, religious, and political diversity. This is this model, which we see in the contemporary time, and we saw it in the colonial time, but it is started in Europe at the time in which the first encounter between Islam and Europe. And when European culture started to try to understand Islam, they actually put the germs of this in this unbalanced relation between the identity and the other. In this, even when the model that I already drafted could be applied dynamically in every case in the relation between different civilizations in the power structure of the world history. When we come to Islam, that is our main topic, then in this perspective, the knowledge of Islam does not assume a neutral role in the proposal of the dialogue between civilizations, but could be interpreted as a means of control and assimilation. So knowledge as a means of controlling and assimilating another culture, in this case Islam. At that particular historical time, I was thinking about 13th century, when this was even when the process started before, this was the peak of which this paradigm was formed. The Latin Christian world, from one side, for early engaged in the project of assimilation of the Muslim intellectual conquest, which later would have constituted the roots of Renaissance. And at the same time, from another, was pursuing a systematic work of deconstruction and deletion of Islam, both as a revelation, religious revelation, and as a distinct and independent civilization. So the medieval Christian world was actually a close reality, homologated and aggressive. Because it was a world in theory. So it was a world in becoming. It was not established. It was in the process of establishing its identity, which in the constant search for a stable and finding identity did not tolerate any form of difference interpreted as a dangerous destabilizing element. The forces fighting for the political supremacy in different European territories constituted a constant danger for the unity of Christianity and the stability of medieval Europe. So this is the reason why that Islam became the heretic. In the discourse of medieval discourse, Islam was an heresy. The notion of heresy, which is generally understood in the Catholic especially side, is not considered one of the fundamental assets of the Latin Christianity civilization, both in relation to other denominations reclaiming the Christian name and other faiths as Judaism and Islam. The heretic, according to the Orthodox perspective, is familiar, since it shares the founding religious heredity of a civilization, in this case, the medieval Latinitas. But his strange and dangerous side, he decided, throughout a personal and extra-canonical interpretation of the Holy Scripture, to create a language and the cultural, social, and then, of course, necessarily political grammar placed at the heart of a different civilization, and by necessity opposed to the previous one, which both from the theological and the political perspective could not be interpreted as equal, contemporary to the Christian one, or reclaiming the same right to exist along with it. So the Christian Latinitas, they recognize the closeness between Islam and Christianity in a way, but they interpreted it as from a negative side, as an heresy. The notion of orthodoxy and heresy, according to the medieval Catholic mindset are two terms existing in a bilateral relation from the semantic point of view, but unilateral from the political one. The orthodoxy and heresy could be understood in a semantic bilateral relation, since orthodoxy is defined through heresy and vice versa. In other words, the notion of heresy is functional to the formulation of the orthodox theological discourse. The Latin Christianity, through the notion of heresy and the military struggle against the heretics, define both its foundational theological discourse and the political supremacy through the spiritual oversight of Christian nation. In other words, this paradigm is rooted in the identification between Christianitas and Latinitas, so the Christian world and the Latin world, namely between the Christian Catholic Church and the Latin civilization. This identification unweighs the deep relation between orthodoxy and the legitimate political power in the Middle Age. Now, we don't, in the contemporary time or in the modern time, we don't speak anymore about heresy because of the loss of political power by the church. But we do see that this notion of heresy and what is passed from the religious part to the political and social one. So we can actually see the upcoming of this old notion of heresy on the heretic in the extreme form of identity politics. Generally speaking, in the extreme form of identity politics, exemplifies in this case by the medieval Christian approach to Islam, the notion of difference and otherness is quite problematic. Since it is interpreted mainly and most of the time exclusively as something negative.
10 minutes
And
left. 10 minutes left.
Oh, I will.
10 more minutes.
I will. And it will be integrated, assimilated, or annihilated into the identity. In the extreme form of identity politics, others by definition enemies, is not contemplated the possibility of them being in dialogue. According to the identity politics, the notion of identity and difference are interpreted in a relation of necessary opposition. So there cannot be a complementarity. So between identity and difference, or between sameness and otherness, according to the perspective of some form of radical nationalism or extreme form of identity politics, the relation is always violent or rooted in violence. This relation could be considered or named as violent when the identity is identified with something universal, historical, out of historical development, and as foundational. Instead, the difference or otherness should be read as its opposite. It's particular, historical. So in the historical development is considered as an accident, and so contingent. As such, it should be assimilated. So what we actually see now in the context of Europe is multiculturalism. Is multicultural where different entities are meeting. And how it is possible that they meet and they share a place which is not only geographical, but this place which is also social and later also political. This is the main issue that now Muslims are facing in Europe. So the risk is to be marginalized. The risk is to be an accident in the history of of Europe, and it should as to be the risk is that it will be considered as other, to be assimilated, to be annihilated in their cultural diversity. No, we know that a religion, as part of the identity of an individual, group, or civilization, should be inclusive, open to historical development. Or it loses in the long run the capacity to inspire a real and positive change in the society. And this is, as far as the meaning of the term is concerned, multiculturalism indicates the presence of two or more cultures inside a space, which could be national, geographic, political, and social. multiculturalism at the national or geographical levels indicated the presence of different cultures inside a space geographically circumscribed, which could be or not also politically organized. Both at political and social levels, multiculturalism is related to the impact of different cultures on the political and social spheres. All this distinction, however, could be reconducted to essential issues widely discussed in our time, which is how is possible, and if it is possible, that a multi-religious or multicultural society could reach the political unity. So can a multicultural society reach a political unity? This is certain. This means that political unity doesn't mean that there is no difference, but that every part connected, every part we have got the same right and the same respect in the political and social arena in a multicultural society. The main question is, again, multiculturalism is a threat to the identity of a nation, and this question raises other two fundamental issues, which is identity is monolithic, or the historical identity, which is interpreted as a closed process, is possible. The answer of this question are both negative, and they involve the notion of identity and difference interpreted not as in opposition relation, but as a complementarity. So before we saw a model in which the other and the identity, they are in opposition relation. Now we see a model in which they are they complement each other. In other words, identity is meaningful or in relation to the difference, and the difference could be understood properly only in relation to identity. In other words, identity is inside the difference, and the difference is inside identity. This means that in their semantic dialogical relation, these two terms could not be separated. So one is meaningless without the other. So this is the relation stands on a set of paradigms which do not be reduced to a rational speculation, but are also an outcome of a political and ethical choice. The grammar of the language, this means that an higher grammar, the rules of our language, but the rules of the way in which we use our language, in which we create a communication with the other, is first of all an ethic act before being political. So in the cultural space of Europe, Islam is introduced as an ideology which is exclusivist, reactionary, so which is becoming engaged exclusively in a discourse which is actually defensive from every attack and every form of criticism, or reactive. Muslims themselves seem to see Islam as the other sometimes, which cannot be assimilated. The other, which is by necessity an outsider in the history of the West. Islam actually should push for the boundaries and move forward the boundaries of the cultural, political, and religious world. So in a situation, which is the European one, where Islam is seen generally as the denial of civilization itself, Muslims should reconstruct their civilization, rediscovering their potentialities. So what should be done actually? What is the main issues that Muslims should face, and how they can change this paradigm of relation in a multicultural society? Because the change should come from themselves. They cannot come from outside. Muslims are called to create an inclusive space, a space of encounter, a space of mediation between different extreme positions, who could be social, political, or economic. They should create a space of dialogue, promoting mutual understanding. They should promote both cultural and religious presence. Muslims should not interiorize, actually, it is very important, the language of violence or objectification, but they should try to create a space open. So an open ideological space is a space which is not polarized in the discourse we versus them, but is an open ideological space is a space which is continuously rebuilt and changed. Is actually the real democratical space. And then a space should be shareable, not twisted to serve a particular agenda. Inclusive, a space through which Muslims could enter again the process of world history. So the problem is that Muslims are out of the world history as an independent subject. As an independent subject, this is very important, not as a negative counterpart of other historical and civilizational discourse. Muslims, in other words, should rediscover the enormous power, culture, spiritual and moral of Islam. These potentialities can be developed in any society, if of course the law protects basic human rights as freedom of religion and expression of religious belief and way of life. Actually, the last part is what we have to challenge is the notion of minority. In a democratic space, yes, I will. In a democratic space, the notion of minority is always subject to be rediscovered and negotiated. So the fundamental I'm concluding. Actually, the attempt of promoting and imposing a monolithic culture and political model expression of the notion and these people have been the discourse on which the rule has been built and developed. This kind of language and mental asset is the negation of the values of democracy. So this means that to polarize the political discourse in which there is the majority of and there is a minority in which they are considered as such, it is in deeply speaking is a negation of the values of democracy, in which the notion of minority and majority at different levels is always hybrid and fluid. The supposed minority seems to be interpreted as a passive receivers of a set of rights guaranteed by the majority. However, this set of rights could be instead interpreted as a limit of their social inclusion and political participation. In other words, the stress on the causes of both minorities and majorities could be easily twisted to serve to a populist political agenda. So what should do the Muslim is they should promote an open society in which the notion of majority and minority is fluid, in which is continuously rebuilt, is always is always on the possibility to change, and should not be trapped inside the grammar of identitarian violent discourse, in which impose its own values or its own decision, and see the others as in constant or necessary opposition to them. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sabrina Lay, for this important, profound, historical, philosophical, contextual submission on how we should look and approach the future of Islam and Muslims within the context of multicultural, multi-religious, multiracial, multi-civilizational societies and in the globalized world. Of course, yeah, I have seen some complaints over there that you are talking fast, and of course this is I think understood, because when we have very short time, we try our best to convey as much as possible, and I think that's the reason why Dr. Sabrina has been going fast, and of course I have been also hammering her by reminding her about the time. So I seek the excuse of everybody, and I apologize if this affected the way we receive what she has been saying, but I trust that her message was clear and can be, inshallah, understood well. Now we move to the second speaker, Dr. Abdul Latif Shalikandi, who is of Indian origin. He is based in Rome, and he's a scholar. He has studied philosophy. He has studied law. He's a kind of multidisciplinary person going across the borders of disciplines, not locked up in one discipline. And he has been active in different ways with organizations, with students, with universities in Rome, in the UK, and in multiple forms. He has publications in the pipe expected to be released soon. So he is one of the major figures at Tawasul Institute, and perhaps people will have some question in their minds about the relationship of these respected speakers. I should have mentioned it from the beginning, but they are, yes, they are. She is from Italy, he is from India. They are both working in Tawassul, but they both form one family because they are husband and wife. So that's why they are using the same platform from the same place. They are husband and wife, and we wish them and all Muslim families well-being and happiness and success. So,
MashaAllah, nice to hear you, Ustaz. Thank you.
So Dr. Abdul Latif is going to talk to us. He is the advisor for international affairs of Tawassul, or the Reaching Out institution, and he is one of its pillars, together with Dr. Sabrina, and of course they have their associates and collaborators. So he is going to talk to us about Orientalism and Islam, the production of knowledge, power, and the Muslim. Means what is the image of the Muslim within this discipline, which is centuries old, intellectual tradition. What is Muslim as a subject and as an object, and the Muslim world, the Muslim as culture, as religion, as civilization, and as communities. So the floor is his, and he's supposed to talk to us in 30 minutes, but I think he can manage in 25 minutes perhaps, or the 30 minutes, that should be okay. So we can have some time for questions and answers. Please, Dr. Abdul Latif, تفضل.
شكرا يا أستاذ مساوي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وأصحابه أجمعين. Dr. Masawi, Dr. Fatmir, and our brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Talking from Rome, the cultural capital of West, across the globe in Kuala Lumpur. This shows Islam is not just an Oriental religion. You just heard from Sabrina. Sabrina speaks very theoretically and philosophically. You know, perhaps she should send a lecture, and one has to really sit and interpret what she speaks. And she's very good in the production of knowledge. I just wanted to, as a congratulation, as an encouragement to her, she just produced a 2-volume biography of the Prophet ﷺ, just came few days ago. This is one of the most read biographies. When it came out, the first volume, she completed the second volume. It has just come out. So this is the type of work that we do. We work in the production of knowledge. What does it mean, production of knowledge? Not to create an Occidentalism against Orientalism, but creating a uniformal humanistic knowledge. That is what we do. Nobody, I think I need 30 minutes, perhaps, if I'm permitted to take that time. So I wanted to, give certain, tangible. Sabrina spoke in a very, abstract way, philosophical way. I want to give just some information and some analysis. No scholar, no thinker can be detached from the situation which he grew up. So my experience in India, growing up in India, the Malabar region of India, as the great ancestors from Arabia came there, married local people, we created a Malabar Mapla Muslim culture in a predominantly Hindu society. So this idea of looking at people as the other, I experienced growing up. Now it is unfortunately becoming dominant. The idea of radical nationalism is really working in India on the Orientalistic line. So Orientalism is a part of my life. Just like Edward Said growing up in Egypt and thrown out of Palestine, and then going to study United States, teaching United States, and felt that carrying the burden of the East, that powerlessness. So this powerlessness is there as an intellectual in my life, but at the same time, we are trying to, make it in a positive way. So now, what is Orientalism? Orientalism, before Orientalism, I talked about the West. Islam and the West is a very fascinating subject to study. Islam and the West. One of the most important, understanding a book in the Muslim text of the 20th century is Muhammad Asad's Islam at the Crossroads. In the Islam at the Crossroads, I'm just putting the background. In the Islam at the Crossroads, Muhammad Asad discussed it's a very small book, around 106 or 107 pages, 110 pages. He wrote when he was living in Delhi in 1934. In that book, Muhammad Asad talks about Islam's relationship with the West. In the beginning of the 20th century, just after the fall of Ottoman Khilafat. And in that book, there is a very interesting chapter in the shadow of the Crusades, or in the shadow of the Crusades. In that book, Asad speaks about how image of Islam was created in the West. And Asad sees the image of Islam decisively formed in the Western consciousness in the light of the Crusades, which lasted, almost 2 centuries. It was at this time, as Europe was coming out of almost 1,000-year-old time when Rome was sacked by barbarians and Europe was coming out. Europe was just in its childhood, from its own identity. It was that time that Islam and the West first active meeting. That meeting was unfortunately confrontational. Of course, Islam was there before in Spain for a few hundred years. As we know, Islam came in 750 or 700, early in the third decade of in the 7th century. But the real formation of image of Islam happened in the light of that Crusades. As the childhood, the birth of Europe. Before that, there were, provinces, languages, countries. But that crusade, they started against an Islamic East. That identity was formed. It was that time that the identity of Islam and the West, the Western consciousness, Islam as a religion, Islam, as Sabrina was saying, that Islam as the other was formed. So the experience was not pleasant, though Islam, from Islam, Europeans learned before that. So this is a very important point. This is called like a civilizational childhood trauma. This trauma is there. It is still continuing. This is one of the most decisive point in the Islam-West relations. And unfortunately, that idea is still continuing. For example, there is Norman Daniel. Norman Daniel wrote a very classic book, Islam and the West, the making of an image, first published in 1960 and 1960, and it came out towards the second edition came out before his death, in 1960, 1990s, 1992. So Norman Daniel also in the introduction of his 1992 edition say the same thing, the earliest Christian reaction to Islam were much the same as they have been until quite recently. Means that Islam's relationship with remains the same in spite of the time and change and place. It almost the same. The tradition has been continuous in its and still alive. When Norman Daniel, in his classic studies, studied Islam's relationship with the West, he published his book in 1960, then reissuing its edition in 1980, he makes the same observation. He studies the image of Islam in the West during the medieval times, then taking back what was happening in 1960s and beginning of the 20th century, continuing now, he says that this has become a discourse. So it has become a discourse. So what you hear today about Islam from the media pundits or all this news channel, it is a reprojection, a reintroduction of the same medieval image that has been created centuries ago. This is a very important point. So this is one aspect. That is where Edward Said says that Islam becomes a discourse here. The discourse on Islam, Orientalist discourse on Islam. This is aspect I'm just coming to a second. Second, there is another aspect that obviously by the time Islam entered the Western conscious, first in Spain, and second through the Crusades, Christianity has become a part and parcel of Western tradition. So what happens is that Western outlook of Islam is almost even now dominated by Christian outlook. This is surprising because during the past century, Christian faith has deeply decreased in the Western consciousness. For example, a country like Italy, though the majority of the people are Catholic, perhaps 20 or 30% are, practicing believers. This is also the case in most of the European countries. Unlike America, where religion plays a crucial role. But in spite of the change, in spite of the loss of faith, in spite of the Christian values, being decreased, West still, in the back of the conscience, views Islam through a Christian theological eye. What is a Christian theological eye? It is related to how Christianity evolved from a Jewish faith, Jewish Christians, an Abrahamic tradition. It completely evolved throughout the centuries, and it sees itself and still sees itself as the complete and final revelation from God. So for the past hundreds of years, Christianity basically, in spite of the much more opening, in 1962, 65, there was this famous, Second Vatican Council in which, the Catholic Church accepted Muslims worshipping the same God, but still they are not open to the Prophet Muhammad in whatever way, even as a religious leader. So what happens is that our childhood notions still continues. Even when we lose the faith, it continues. So civilization also in the same way. Because West, in spite of the fact that dominant Western philosophers and Western discourse is, not rooted in religion, but that childhood connection of the civilization memory still continue. Now, what is the case? In this case, they try to see Islam through a Christian eye, theologically, Godhood, the worldview. We know that Christianity, as it evolved through the letters of Paul and a world-denying religion, and when St. Augustine wrote his work about this, world-denying religion, it became what it was not initially. So for them, Islam appears to be very worldly religion. Prophet Muhammad appears to be, there is no spirituality in Islam, and then there is another problem. As St. Paul wrote his letters, and we know that according to the classical understanding of Christianity, the command, we have got a new command. That new command is in the sonship of Jesus, a theology where faith plays major role. But when we look at Islam with all its laws, all its, for example, so many times I've been asked by a Christian priest in England and here, why do you have to, when you pray, why do you have to
follow a specific time? Why do you have to make a movement? Why do you have to talk about, why do you have to say that there is no division between this world and next world? So Islam appears to be a very, what you call it, very worldly religion, deeply in the world than in the next world. So this is another problem in understanding Islam. Then thirdly, the Godhood, the concept of Trinity, and the role of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Prophet Muhammad has been a constant, philosophical problem for Christian theologians. This can be seen when we read the earliest. The first time, according to R.W. Southern, in his Islam and the West, another classic book written by R.W. Southern, the first time Europeans in the Northern Europe heard about Prophet Muhammad, not about Spain. I mean, Northern Europe was during the Crusade time. So this was the first time more Europeans heard. So they see him as someone who is, who is into this world, then a religious person, reflected in the way they constructed the life of Jesus. Life of Jesus as actually it is like any other Jew, any other Abrahamic religions. There was no difference between this world and next world, but they constructed image as someone who is otherworldly. So when they come across Prophet Muhammad, they come across him as too worldly. I remember talking to so many, this you can see when we look at Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a great thinker. I did my MPhil on him. You can see, he studied, he learned a lot from Ibn Rushd, Imam Ghazali, and he calls Ibn Rushd the teacher in his Sama Theologia. But the way he looks at Prophet Muhammad is unbelievably, I don't want to quote about it. This is the case with Dante, and this idea of the Prophet Muhammad continues. I have got here, interestingly, Sabrina, as I just said, Sabrina just completed her biography. I asked her to get this book. This is a book published in Cambridge, Muhammad, one Jonathan edited. It's a Cambridge Companion. You can imagine there is, of course, there are so many good articles, but the way Prophet's life has been dramatized in this book is, when we read its introduction, first of all, the editor says that Prophet Muhammad saw himself as basically as an Arab prophet. Then Prophet Muhammad's name is immediately connected to, Al-Baradai, who was the chairman of Atomic Energy Commission in the past. And you cannot see any sort of dramatizing his life. You won't see anything about what prophet is, who prophet is, how prophet is in its tradition. Of course, this book has very much improved. This is published in 2010. But you can see when we look at this book, when we go back and what Thomas Aquinas thought about the prophet, what 19th century, 20th century Orientalists like William Moore or Goldsheher or so many others, you can see the same projection of prophet. But at the same time, this is another interesting book, Cambridge Companion to Stoics. Stoics, a completely disappeared philosophy. The language is more academic. The language is more non-judgmental. But when it comes to the life of the prophet, the language is non-judgmental. Basically, in spite of certain good articles, this is like, I can still see that this is a more medieval polemic in a modern form. So here comes the Orientalism. Orientalism, what is Orientalism? Orientalism is an overwhelming discourse. When we talk about Orientalism, we mainly think about the book of Edward Said, Orientalism. Now it's almost like synonymous. Many of us started hearing about Orientalism in the late 80s and late 70s and early 80s. Orientalism is part of the West. Orientalism is an alter ego of the West. Orientalism, as Edward Said says, it is an overwhelming discourse in which images are created, in which images are projected, in which a new reality is created in the light of the geopolitical interest. So I just want to give a quick historical survey. So we know about Orientalism, especially Muslim scholars back in the late 19th century, like Jamaluddin Afghani and Muhammad Abdu, and so many people talk about. There is this Jamaluddin Afghani replying to Ernest Renan. But the first scholar, Muslim scholar, who seemed to have understood the philosophical foundation of Orientalism is Muhammad Asad. Muhammad Asad, in the same 1934 Islam at the Crossroads, in a long chapter, explains all about Orientalism. It's interesting that I remember reading this book as a teenager, written in a poorly printed copy of 1934, still circulating without any editing. He gives a very classic approach to the Orientalism. It was Muhammad Asad. So then what happens, that idea has been reprojected. So
10 minutes left, Dr. Abdullah.
Okay. So what happens is that in the 1940, following the Second World War, West was clearly aware of the change in our land, in our public space. So there is a shift. So we can see in 1960s, Anwar Abdel Malik, an Egyptian, Coptic Christian, writing in the Diogenes, Orientalism in Crisis. Then when I said 1962 Second Vatican Council, opening up to the Muslims. So obviously Second World War opened a lot of things. So you can see that early in 70s, Talal Asad writing Colonial Encounter and Colonial Anthropologies. So then came the book in 1978, Edward Said's Orientalism. Edward Said's Orientalism is a way of taking inventory of himself. His condition was peculiar. He was an Arab speaking. He was a minority within minorities. He was not a Muslim. He was a Christian, not himself Catholic, but a minority within the Christian. But he was acutely aware of the projections. So he was basically a professor of comparative theology, did his PhD on Joseph Conrad, fiction of the autobiography. So it was in 1967 war that prompted him. So he got this book in 1978, very interesting book, which heralded the post-colonial studies. And so what is the difference between, like also, there was also Palestinians, A.L. Tibawi, writing about, English-speaking Orientalists. But the Edward Said's book is that it created a deep philosophical, literary, and deeply, complicated, but at the same time, very insightful text. So Orientalism came out in 78, then Covering Islam came out in 1980, then came out in 1994, Culture and Realism. So when we study these three books, you can see that how this has been all created, how this has been all projected. One of the key ideas about Edward Said's criticism of Orientalism is that there are so many issues related to Orientalism. One of the things that Orientalism seems to be, believing that, one of the main canons of Orientalism is that if you study Arabic language or an Eastern language for a couple of years, you can understand the West, you can understand Islam, you can make honest judgment on Islam. So Orientalism, one of the methodological problem Orientalism, Edward Said is saying that, it forgets that knowledge about other culture and religions and people are entirely subjective. So, for example, when Bernard Lewis or any other Orientalist or Ignace Goldsihar or Joseph Schacht or anybody, when they come to study Islam, they come with a lot of baggage, their own religious prejudices, their own inability to understand other language, other culture. Then what they see is that they project their ideas into Islam, then they create an Orient. So this has been the story of Orientalism. So in this way, Edward Said really, after the publication of Orientalism, 10, 15 years, Orientalism, we thought that Orientalism completely disappeared. But now we have got, especially after the September 11, the last 20 years, you have got a new Orientalism. So there is one question. So Edward Said clearly asked, or is knowledge related to Islam produced in the current public space neutral and civil knowledge or political knowledge? Edward Said say that, or the argument is that it is arguably rooted in projection, reflecting the internalization of many of the Western vulnerabilities, historical Orientalism, prejudices, and the current tendency for solidification. So what happens is that Orientalists seems to forget that knowledge about other culture where Islam becomes an object. They think that, being a subject, Orientalism is the subject. So then it is created in the light of a unique power relations. There is an enormous power of the government, of the think tanks, of all these things. Then they go on to study. For example, this book I talk about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How Quran look at Prophet Muhammad, how Hadith projects Prophet Muhammad, how early Islamic scholarship look at Prophet Muhammad. It doesn't matter. What matters is that how we look at Islam. So this is one of the most important. So, but many of the people, many of the Orientalists still seems to believe that, our culture, it is scientific. It is, they don't see that, it is a humanistic knowledge. We need change. Of course, when Orientalism came out, there was a soul searching. Actually, one of the things is that Orientalists themselves don't call themselves Orientalists anymore. So this term, they themselves, gave up. I remember my own personal experience. I attended one of the greatest Orientalist conference in Hungary back in the late 1990s. I was a young student then. I saw they were talking about Islam. They were not talking about Islam. They were thinking that they were talking about Islam. Someone was talking about magic and Islam. I found someone who spent her entire career studying magic in Islam, whereas we know magic is not a decisive thing, or some talisman, or some very obscure script. Someone was trying to find grammatical mistakes in the Quran, and so many things, and then projections about Arab culture. And I looked at myself, oh my God, this is not the Islam I am familiar with. This is not the Islam I am grew up. This is the Prophet that I knew. So I myself was disoriented. I was a young student then. So there is something called post-truth. Post-truth is a very interesting word. If you want me to define Orientalism in one word, I call it as a post-truth. Means that there is no truth. What matters is the interpretation. So you can call Prophet Muhammad self. Anyone who studied even briefly the life of the Prophet Muhammad, he knows that he never saw himself as an Arab prophet alone. So this kind of post-truth, that you say something, you project something, and it becomes a reality. There is another interesting word, gaslighting. Gaslighting is the word, according to Webster dictionary, Merriam-Webster dictionary, it has been chosen as the word of, most searched word of 2022. Gaslighting means that, you manipulate other people. It is a story. I'm just going to finish in 2 minutes. It is from a movie, came out in 1940s, that a manipulating husband manipulate his wife, trying to make this wife believe that she lost his, thinking. There is a reality which she is not in. So the Orientalism is like that. They create a reality. They create a post-truth. Then it is accepted as truth. So this is the challenge which we are facing. So just to conclude, in 2 minutes, I will conclude. So what is the solution? Our solution is that not to create an Occidentalism against Orientalism. We need to create a knowledge tradition. We need to create a worldview which is rooted in humanism. For example, classical scholars 1,000 years ago, Al-Biruni studied India. Al-Biruni's India is one of the most authentic books on India. And Al-Biruni was very much aware of the subjective aspect of studying. He's an Iraqi Muslim living in India, studying India. But he said one thing, which Orientalists has yet to say: I am a Muslim, but I am trying my best to approach Indian culture in spite of the huge difference as they see it. So the question is this: can they study Islam as Muslims see it? Can we study Christianity? Can we study West? They see it, or is it all projection? So unfortunately, this projection continues. There is much soul searching among the Orientalists. So what we are doing in Tawasul, if you have questions, as you can say, we are trying to produce knowledge away from power. Knowledge is always produced in power relations. So the strong write the history. Edward Said starts, I'm just going to finish, the beginning of the Orientalism, the Napoleonic invasion. So where all these descriptions of Egypt, volumes and volumes. Then there was this very humble Egyptian scholar, Abdurrahman Jabriti. He is chronicling the Napoleonic invasion. So he writes from the perspective of a conquered people, subaltern. So we Muslims in Europe seems to be subaltern. So when we challenge the dominant discourse, as Sabrina said, we should not create an Occidentalism. We should be honest. We should believe in the Quranic dictum that لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Whether one is a Christian or a Hindu or a Jew or a Westerner, they all partake in the dignity that God has given. That they are all sons of Adam. But of course, then we Muslims or Christians, whatever. So that way, like earliest scholars did, we have to produce knowledge, academically sound, as objective as possible. This is another thing that it may not be possible. This is what we are Tawasul doing. Alhamdulillah, Sabrina and I, we have almost produced 100 books, different books on different things. We have produced books on Hinduism and Christianity and the translation of Bukhari, biography of the Prophet. And we are continuing our journey. And we would be very happy to work with you all. And thank you for listening. I need to speak. I have so many things to say, but there is a time. And as I said, Sabrina, theoretical explanation, I give you some practical things. I hope both this thing will, give a clear picture to you. Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Latif, for this very informative submission on Orientalism as a block making and a hurdle making understanding and mutual understanding, actually, and reciprocal respect, but a little bit difficult. So while Dr. Sabrina has brought to us a vision on how to go about and what context, Dr. Abdul Latif, I can justly say, he has put us in front of a historical block, which is Orientalism. Of course, we may not actually generalize to each and every individual Orientalist, because there are many who have done good work and tried their best to be as objective as possible. But of course, there are some stereotypes, there are some deeply seated negative images that are constituting still obstacles to kind of understanding. And of course, what he has suggested, that we should go beyond just a counter-Orientalism. Some people called it Occidentalism, like one of the Iranian scholars. And actually, there are now centers by the name of Al-Istighrab, or Occidentalism, and there are journals in the name of Occidental. Some people are theorizing about Occidentalism, but I think the approach which Dr. Abdul Latif has suggested is more truthful, more with the spirit of Islam, because Islam looks for what is common and what is universal among human beings. So with those remarks, I would like first to look into the chats. I see one or two questions. The first question is, I can just read to the learned speakers, and it's up to them to respond. Lack of support, experienced issues of identity and acculturation, difficulties maintaining religious beliefs, and struggles with gender relations are the hurdles that most young Muslims are currently facing in the West. Could you please tap on these points? This is the first question. So it's especially about, and this question was early on by Jeffrey Lang. Actually, he made the cry, losing our faith and how to struggle in order to preserve our faith and values. The other, yeah, I would read it, and perhaps every one of you has read it. And I think it has its answer already in the Tawasul, the institute itself, and this universalistic approach. Someone he asked this question. It will be interesting to know how the two speakers met and decide to get into wedlock. I think this is a personal question, but this is, of course, Allah yaktub. This is what Allah decrees and decides for people, and it's part of this human tawasul. This Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us from male and female and made us into nations and tribes, etc., in order to know each other. So the floor is to our learned speakers to answer at least the first question. I don't think the second question, maybe we call it a joke, but if you want to answer it, it's up to you. Please, Dr. Sabrina.
So yeah, this is the choral questions. It actually, this is what, and then it works. Actually, the passage from religion as a culture and the religion as a personal experience. Actually, I think the problem of the young generation of Muslims living in Europe, but this I know that also is becoming a problem of young generation, Muslim young generation all over the world, is to be able to differentiate about what is a culture, how religion in a way is molded by a culture. So it became a way of life. So a way of life is not necessarily interiorized. When you follow a way of life, it's not necessary that you establish a personal relation with God. What is Islam asks you to do? So I think the problem is on that level. So if you don't develop in yourself a faith, if you are not capable to ask yourself some big questions about human life, human future, human destiny, and you're not capable to answer through Islam, which is not something that is inborn in you, signs that you are part of the Muslim community. This is the main problem. So Islam is something that you should struggle to reach, the knowledge about the Quran, and the personal development of relation with God through a deep form of spirituality, which is not necessarily to involve some external manifestation. This is the problem. Now we see that when more a society became in a way legalistic in the religious sense, more we see a lot of external expression, but we don't see the core values of this the religion teaching in that society. And so that it opened the way to atheism in the young generation. It's not something which is start abruptly because Muslim youth meet the West. It's not in that part. It's the problem to interiorize religious teachings and to live them in your daily life. Sometimes that the fact that you see other people living in a different way doesn't mean that you have to follow their pattern. So, and then also this idea of Western people, all of them having this extremely liberal life, I don't think is much the reality. So every human being lives at a different levels. Everyone faces the same issues, but if you want to maintain your own integrity, it is except you, it's your responsibility. And to know Islam is your responsibility, because I that we don't have clergy in Sunni Islam. So this is every individual is bound to develop his own spirituality and relation with God. This is not a responsibility that can be given to the shoulder of other people. It's not a responsibility which no Muslim can escape. And it is not possible if you don't build also the knowledge of on the knowledge of Islam itself. It's not possible. So this is, I invite the young generation to come back to themselves and to understand what is the meaning of deen, as because sometimes they confound, because religion and deen is not the same. So they should go deeply into the knowledge of Islam, develop their own spirituality. It's not a pattern of behavior that makes you Muslim, but the intention which you are. So, thank you.
Dr. Abdulatif, you would like to add something to the question?
Yes, I actually, Sabrina has replied, when Sabrina replies, there is nothing left. So I just want to make a comment that I know that I noticed that I myself was speaking very fast. So some people also commented, I'm sorry about that, because the timing, I was having this idea that we might be getting 40 minutes and all, sorry about that. So any questions, anything which is not clear, if you couldn't understand what I said, I'm sorry. So I'm here for questions, and any other things here. Especially the whole, if you're publishing, we will send the article, the speech in the form of an article. So just want to say that I noted some of the comments. So that was not intentional, but it happened, sorry.
Yeah. I thank you very much really for your understanding. Of course, we have the constraints of time here in Malaysia. We are about to go to Maghrib prayer, and some people may need to leave office to go, because you are in daytime. We are approaching twilight. So, this gap of time
absolutely
is affecting us. But I look forward, and the Institute looks forward to really receive your submissions in the form of articles, because we have our journal, International Journal of Muslim World Studies. And
wonderful.
What you have been talking about fits very well in the goals and the policy of this journal. So if you really work out them in the final shape as journal articles, we would be very glad to have them published, and inshallah they will benefit each and everyone who are interested in such issues. And of course, this event is not the first and the last to deal with such issues, because there are complex issues, ongoing issues, developing and unfolding every day. But I think we need to create a new awareness and forge new ways of doing things. And certainly we will benefit from Tawassul's experience and your experience in Italy and with the others as well. So
somebody asked a question about how did we meet?
So that's a question. Actually, the question is I know the guy very well. He's a close guy of mine. He's a senior person, but I think maybe I think it's part of this universalism of Islam. So please, if you have anything to say about it, you feel free.
Actually, I am basically very people's person. I'm private, very private. Sabrina is a very private person. I remember we meeting for a coffee at a place. Then, as I said, I've been studying Orientalism for the last 25 years, and it's part of my studies. So I accidentally met, and it's a very difficult text to read even now. One has to read it at least 5 times. I suggest especially the students and researchers who are studying in humanities, to read Orientalism, covering Islam, and also culture and belief. These 3 texts are very classic. So I have given this book to so many people, a lot of them doing. I remember I gave this book to a student, a woman, just without Sabrina hearing that, in 1990s. She was doing PhD in Oxford. She was saying, I couldn't understand. But what happened when I met Sabrina in a university cafe, I said, let us go and have to the bookshop. So I bought the Italian translation of Orientalism and gave Sabrina. And I said, oh my God. I said, okay, I have given But after 5 days, she came to me and started talking about the whole book. In 5 days, she completely studied whole Orientalism. So then that was shock to me, because then I realized that she had got all this tradition of, she was taught Latin and Greek, studious, this Jesuit tradition. So this was my shock to me first time. So not only that she understood, she was talking to me like she has been reading it for a long time. So then I remember giving her another very tough book, Allama Iqbal's Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. It's a very classic, very difficult to understand. She studied it. So there started our discussion. But interestingly, this is because she is studious, but I never discussed Islam. This is one of the things. Islam is itself. You do not need any introduction. One of the things which Sabrina is saying, that I used to work with her, then whenever I saw, or still I do, bad things, alcohol bottles on the road, people drink and throw that, I used to, remove it. Then she thought that what happened to this guy? This guy seems. Then I explained the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it is academic, it's universal, and never. One of the things which I want to tell my youngsters, that never imitate evangelical preachers. If you want to talk to people in the West, do not start talking about the 20 mystics in Bible, try to prove. No, just show the prophetic sunnah, inclusiveness, appreciation. So do not go for, most of the people, Italians I know, they are open to positive things. We just have to put the light. So this is what I want to say, So this is the story.
And that's what brought you together.
Yes. That's what it is. Then also, okay, Sabrina, if wants to add anything.
No.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Karim, for this enlightening remarks. I just would like to finally that because he has recommended people to read, I think, 3 or 4 books, I would add to these the latest book, Orientalism, by a countryman of Edward Said, Restating Orientalism by Wa'il Hallaq, who has given us a very important perspective on how to understand Orientalism and how to make sense of what it means and what it does. So with those remarks, I thank very deeply.
Excuse me, there is somebody, Belayat Hussein, or somebody wants to ask a question. Sorry to interrupt. I don't know what it is.
Why didn't you write it on chat,
Ustaz, yeah, we want to ask him directly.
Okay, please just half a minute.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Prof, for allowing me to raise a question. So my question directly goes to Dr. Abdul Latif. So since you have studied about Orientalism, so I would like to ask you one question regarding John Luis Esposito. I have known that he has written more than 50 books on Islam. So do you have any opinion on him, that is he
I got your
writing?
Point. I got your point. When I said, we should not be, there are also Orientalists who sees. John Esposito is a Catholic, practicing Catholic. He has written so many books on Islam. Islam, the straight path, is the best introduction, but you won't see that, oppositional, hatred in there. He presents Islam more or less in a, objective way. We can see him as one of the best Orientalists. But there is also another Orientalist who is more scholarly than Orientalism. He died. He translated Quran. A.J. Arbery. There are also people like that. Arbery, John Esposito. But John Esposito also, when he looks at Islam, obviously, he talks mainly about the politics of Islam. He talks mainly about, he does not talk about Islam as a faith. So obviously, this is a good introduction. So one of the things we should not do that, the Quranic dictum, because we don't like any people, we should not do injustice to them. So we should not completely, whitewash as they do. So John Esposito, I know he's worked for a long time. It is one of an exception, but he's not a deep scholar of Islam or anything. He was trained by Ismail Raji Faruqi. This again, Ismail Raji Faruqi's approach really influenced him. So we need more academics from International Islamic University like you, our professor, and all, writing and training scholars. So John Esposito is a reflection of his teacher, Ismail Raji Faruqi, who knew the West. So just briefly, I don't want to take the time.
Okay, thank you so much, really, for your submissions, for your answers, for your remarks, and for really you have instructed, give us instructive thoughts and food for thinking, inshallah. So these issues will be carried in form of questions and investigations by each and everyone, wherever we happen to be. And hopefully this will not be the last event, but just a beginning for more fruitful and more cooperative activities in the future. With those remarks, I thank you all, each and everybody, and especially our two learned speakers, brother Dr. Abdul Latif and sister Dr. Sabrina Lay. And we look forward to seeing you sometime in the near future on other occasions. With that, we conclude this important event and leave you in the guidance and protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Salam. It's an honor to meet you all. We send you our prayers from Rome. May Allah bless us all. And I'm also encouraging Sabrina to travel to Malaysia. So if you have any program, you can invite her. She will come there.
Okay,
we are waiting.
I stay here.
You can come physically, inshallah. You are most welcome here.
Yes, we are here.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Fi amanillah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much, sister.
Thank you so much.
Any email, or we have got
nice
our contact with the Dr. Shehu. You can, anyone wants to contact, please feel free to contact us. Okay?
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Masawi, Shehu, and all. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. Masalam. Okay, and now to leave it. Okay.